It's great to see you, Kevin. I'm glad you're here today. Today we're going to be talking about the tariffs on Canadian lumber. This is a big question that I've been asked quite a bit lately, and I think because of the news coverage of the possible tariffs that are coming, the idea that Donald Trump was going to inflict 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports like on day one, and everybody was freaking out about what was going to happen with lumber prices and how that was going to be driving construction costs up. And this was a big concern for a lot of people. Now, I tried to calm everybody down by letting them know that the 25% tariff on Canadian lumber is not new. Right? That might be, I mean, the 25% is a lot, but tariffs on Canadian lumber, even extreme tariffs of 18 to 20%, are not new. This is something that has happened many times in the past. And although it has occurred in the history of lumber, the trade between Canadian and between Canada and the United States, nobody cared back then. Nobody, like some people cared, but most people had no clue that it was even happening, nor did they care about what the price of lumber would be because of it. However, because it's all over the news, now everybody's really concerned and they want to know what the hell is going on. So just to kind of ease everybody's mind, we here in the United States consume about 20% of our softwood imports that come from Canada. So out of all the softwood that we use here in the United States, and what I mean by softwood is that you have hardwoods, softwoods. Softwoods is typically used in the construction, the framing aspect of the building. Hardwoods are used more in trim or flooring or something of the finished portion of the construction. So softwood imports is by far the most critical part of as far as the lumber industry goes when it comes to this tariffs and how that's going to impact the United States. Now, when we think about this, the softwood imports of 20% that come into the United States, that portion is going to get hit with the tariff. So we're talking a small portion of the lumber that's actually consumed here in the United States is going to have a tariff attached to that. So it's not like it's going to be across all the lumber out there. And it's not like all this lumber that's coming in from Canada is all of a sudden going to cause this huge price increase to take place. Will there be price increases that happen because of it? Yeah, probably, especially in things like, say, Western red cedar. This is a mainly, well, I wouldn't say mainly, but a major import coming from Canada. I'm not sure like what the exact percentage is, but I believe that the majority of it does come in out of Canada. That, with a 25 or even 20% tariff attached to it, can be very impactful to the sales that are taking place here in the United States because of the amount that comes in. Now, what Canada is doing, and they had planned this well in advance. I mean, we talked about this in our videos here on the Uneducated Economist for years, that when the tariffs hit the Canadian lumber mills, like, because Donald Trump and Biden, this is not new, like this whole idea. They both inflicted tariffs upon the Canadian lumber. Now, when this starts to happen, and it happens in an extreme way, these Canadian mills set up shop in the United States. I don't know how many people know this, right? But these big players like Canfor, Interfor, there's, a bunch of them out there, West Fraser, all these big Canadian mills, they're setting up shop here in the United States. Down in the southern part of the United States, there's a glut of pine trees, and they're taking advantage of that. And they don't pay tariffs on production that's done here in the United States. See, now this is where I think a lot of people are misunderstanding what it is that's happening within the lumber industry. These tariffs concern me very little. Like, I have very little concern about what's going to happen with the lumber prices going into the future when these tariffs hit the Canadian mills. It's not going to be that impactful. I mean, is it going to have some? Sure. Certain species like Western red cedar, it'll probably be very impactful. But for the construction industry itself, it's probably going to be very minute, even with the 25% tariff on it. So I think this is important to understand, because a lot of times when we hear the mainstream media or listen to some of the talking points coming across that mainstream media news, it's not anywhere close to realistic or logical compared to what it is that we have experienced in the past. A lot of times it's very fear-mongering, fear-ridden stuff so that they can get your attention so that you continue to pay attention to that, particular subject or that particular article. But it's not as bad as what a lot of people seem to think it is. I've had people call me up and saying, oh man, how much is it going to go? How far is it going to go? Like, should I buy now? And I'm thinking, well, if you need the lumber, buy now because it's pretty cheap. I can't imagine it getting cheaper from here. So if it does go up, it's very realistic in my mind that it would go up if demand increases. But if it does go up, people are going to point at the tariffs and say that's the reason. Right? They've already got it in their head that if there was an increase in lumber prices, that would be the reason for it. But I think that's very inaccurate. I don't think that's, a good way of looking at what is happening right now within the lumber industry. Really what has taken place right now is there's very little demand. The home builders are not out there ramping up, projects and demanding the mills to provide them with a lot of lumber. That's not taking place right now. So when you have a very low demand and a limited amount of supply out there, you're setting yourself up for a condition in which that lumber prices can really skyrocket. And I mean, it's not something that I am like terribly concerned about at this point, seeing that happening, but seeing how it's all, geared up, lined up for that sort of situation to take place, it's very concerning what could happen in the future. Am I concerned about it right now? No. Right? But it is a possibility that if there was, for whatever reason, lowering of interest rates or, I don't know, I don't think the deregulation is actually going to do anything about it. But if for whatever reason the home building demand starts to pick up, I just don't feel that there's enough lumber within the system that can continue to provide, prices at the level that they are. My only assumption is that if the ramping up of building takes place, that you are going to find that there is not enough lumber in the supply chain right now to provide for any kind of significant increase, and you will see the prices skyrocket. And again, people will blame the tariffs on that. And I'm thinking very differently in my view, in the position that I hold, not only at a lumber yard, but I live in the Pacific Northwest. I know mill operators, I know loggers, I know other distribution networks and hubs. There's really no corner of this market that I see. Everybody's focused in on tariffs, and I'm focused in on inventory depletion. Okay. All right, let's move on here. We're going to try and keep this a fairly short video. We're 8 minutes into this, and we'll keep it going for, like, say, another 10 or so here. All right, there is no demand, but okay, that's right. If they rebuild those homes in LA, could that alone cause a big price increase? No, I doubt it. And you have to think about it. Like, they build millions of homes. Like, we're millions of homes short. They burn down, even if they were to burn down 100,000 homes, that would be a lot, and it would be very significant. But you have to think about it. It was just like, how big of a demand is it really going to come from that particular fire-ridden area when you have a time lag from the time that you claim like insurance or whatever on this home till the time that it actually comes into fruition that you're going to actually be building, right? There's a time lag that takes place within that. I mean, will it be a year from now before those houses get started again? 2 years? I mean, will it be 6 months? There's a huge, there's a huge time variance that can take place within that. So if it was all at once, like every single house was going to get started at the exact same time, then, maybe, you might see like, some pretty significant impact because of that. But I just don't feel that it's going to go down like that. It's going to be like, spaced out over time, and it'll be absorbed into the rest of the new construction. I think about it like the hurricanes. People talk about how the hurricanes destroyed all those houses, and now they have to go into the rebuild of it, and this is going to create a huge demand for lumber. I don't see it, right? I see a little bit during the hurricanes for plywood, because a lot of times they're buying that plywood to protect the windows and stores and, houses from the weather damage. And then maybe slightly after that to board it up in case windows broken or something of that nature. But the actual demand for that building product to do the reconstruction, it takes time. After the disaster, it takes a while before those things come into an actual existing project. All right. The stock market loved Trump so far. Whatever. I don't know. I think they love Biden, didn't they? I mean, I don't know about everybody else's stock portfolio, but I did quite well during the Biden administration. Maybe it was just the stocks that I happened to pick. Everybody hated him and thought he had a horrible economy. And I agree, like, I don't know much about Biden politics or anything because I didn't pay attention to a single word he had to say because I didn't think it was that important. But the things that I found important and the places that I put my money towards seem to do very well. Yeah, and maybe I'm hoping that it'll continue to do well going into the future, but I certainly don't give Biden any credit for it. Nor do I give Trump any credit for it either, no matter which direction it goes. Question, is Trump going to use tariffs to fund the government and get rid of income tax? No, the tariffs are not for any of that. I hope people really understand that. The whole idea behind the tariffs is the credible threat. I mean, think about it. Look, day one, we're going to inflict all these tariffs. Think about how impactful that impression was on the people for the last few months. Think about all the things that they did to get ready for the Trump tariffs on day one. They're like, it's a huge credible threat, and it works so well. It works so well for them. And I mean, even now, he was like, well, we're talking February 1st before we inflict what now? It's like, you're going to keep pushing this back? Yeah, of course you would, because it inflicts more credible threat. I mean, if you went ahead and just committed yourself to it, now you don't have any credible threat. You already done signed it. It's like, no, man, no, there goes my credible threat if I sign this away. But let's postpone this for a little bit. Keep that open-ended, right? That way we can keep this credible threat going. Keep, using it as leverage against these other nations out there. That's the point of tariffs. It's not to fund the government. It's not to create a better economy or anything like that. They can't create a better economy. They can't do that. Politics can't do it. You and I, being industrious, having moved into a luxurious life, now we may not interpret it as a luxurious life, but that's exactly what it is. Right? You work hard, you raise your standard of living. What you have done is you have moved into luxuries. The moment that you move into luxuries, there's nothing that can save that. I don't care what politics think that they can do. They can't. They can't fix it. They cannot create an environment that will allow for the shrinking of the inequality to take place without incredible severe pain to the people. They can't do that. They can create a situation that says, hey, isn't this less painful? And people go, yeah, it's less painful. And I was like, sorry about all that inequality that came from that. I know the rich just left you guys even further in the dust, but it wasn't so bad, right? I mean, it could have been way worse. Right? This is what the politics do. I don't trust them. I don't believe them, and I don't appreciate anything that they have to do or say. Right? It's about me figuring out what it is that I need to do in order to conduct myself, because they cannot do anything to help me. Right? There's nobody coming to help. All right. You are my only hope, Obi-Wan. All right. Government spending does help out the economy. It helps out with the separation between the rich and the poor. And I understand that you want to give it meaning that it's helping you. And I even talk with people, in my social circles that really appreciate the government spending and what it is that they do. I don't appreciate it, right? And I'm not going to give it meaning that it's helpful, because I don't believe it is. Now, again, there's nothing I can do about it, so I'm going to have to figure out how to position myself in accordance to that, but I don't believe it's helpful. Somebody else might give it meaning that they are. I don't. All right. All-nighter says exactly P-nice. Okay, question. Simon, what's your opinion on the upcoming steel demand with regards to the consistent debt issues surrounding commercial real estate, more and more buildings left to rot? I don't know, man. A lot of people ask me, what is it that's going to happen because of these particular things, right? And so it's almost like, hey, incorporate this particular event and then correlate that to another event and then how that it'll impact that, right? And so to me, I'm like, well, kind of separate things taking place here, right? You got a real estate issue that's happening with commercial, and then you have the steel industry that has its own issues all on its own. And so now you want to slam these two together and come up with an opinion about what's going to happen because of those two things. And I'm thinking, why don't you just look at them individually? Right? Just look at it individually for what they are. Is the real estate going to do one thing, and is the steel company or the steel industry going to do another? Right? Because you put these two together and say, no, these have to correlate together. It's because you want the outcome of that correlation to then give you a position in your life that you can now, whether it's your construction company or your investment or something of that nature, but you're trying to correlate these two together to make that determination, right? I mean, that's essentially what's going on there. I mean, I don't know, make something up. I mean, you figure that part out. I'm not one to try and, figure out what's going to happen with a steel industry that's in deterioration because it can no longer manufacture within a nation because of the high standard of living that the employees and the companies and the corporation and the location is now requiring in order to stay in operation, right? Like, that's a whole issue all on its own. Right? Are you going to rebuild those buildings? Are you going to do it with the expensive American steel, or are you going to import the cheap foreign production? There's huge, major question differences that's going on there. All right, $5 from Luke Patterson. Thank you so much for the $5. Thoughts on how Social Security funding works with only consumption tax? How would my contributions be associated to me? Social Security number for all purchases. I don't know. To be honest, I don't give that much expectations or belief in the Social Security system to begin with. Like, I don't plan on getting it. Right? Like, I just literally, I have zero plans for Social Security in my future, like, to get it. Right? And I think to myself, if it does happen to be there, cool, bonus. But my expectations of it being there are very small. So when you're thinking like, changes or differences or how it is that it's going to happen to it, yeah, they're going to play some games around with it. But to me, like, I mean, to put any kind of faith in the idea that Social Security is going to be there by the time I get to the point that I can receive it is very questionable. Okay? And then on top of it, what I find most of the time is taking place with Social Security is the government is dangling it out there like a carrot, like, oh, better vote for me or else this is going to happen or that's going to happen or whatever. And so if it's a political carrot, you guys can keep it. Right? I just like, whatever. I'm not going to be manipulated in that fashion. So if it happens to be there, cool. If it's not, I didn't expect it anyway. And that's my personal opinion on it. If you're lucky enough not to need or use it, great, but it's your benefit. You earned it and should be protected. Great, friendly view. I totally agree with you. Do you like being manipulated and controlled by the government on the idea that Social Security was going to be there for you? Do you like that? I don't. Right? And yeah, I could use every penny I can get because I don't have a retirement fund. I'm trying to figure that out right now. But to have government hold that thing over my head and say, hey, you worked hard to get this thing and we're going to dangle it over and you're not in control of any of it. And we're going to, yeah, you know what? You can look at my big middle finger, man, because I am not for it. I'm not you, sir. I'm talking government, right? I'm not going to be controlled in that fashion. I'm not going to be manipulated. I'm not going to be made promises that can't be kept. I mean, if you want to make that promise and say, oh, no, it's really going to be there for you. It's like, okay, great. I don't believe you, but if it is, cool, right? I appreciate it. But I'm not going to trust you to give it to me because I don't believe you can. Okay? And whether it's right or wrong or fair or not, that's not, whatever, I mean, it's like life isn't fair. I get that part. Okay? But again, like, to think that, I'm going to have this thing held over my head, no way. I'm not going to do it. Social Security is only meant as a supplement. If you rely on it to live, then you are toast. I kind of agree with that, Carlos. That's why I keep saying it's a bonus, right? If it's there when I get there, hey, cool. But I got to make other plans because that's not something I'm not going to trust. Question, how do people justify inflation not affecting lumber, silver, or oil? Good question, John. Great question. I ask that all the time. So as people are telling me, no, it's devaluing dollar, you got to understand how the Federal Reserve is operating. They're devaluing the dollar. And I was like, okay, so somehow they magically made it so that it didn't devalue when you're buying gold, silver, or I'm not sorry, when you're buying silver, oil, or lumber. Right? All of a sudden, you got all the value in your dollars you want right there. Right? Didn't lose its purchasing power when you were buying a barrel of oil. Didn't lose its purchasing power in buying silver. Didn't lose its purchasing power buying lumber. It has all the purchasing power in the world to buy three very common, critical commodities known to man. Right? All of a sudden, there's there's no inflation in those products, those commodities. Very strange. Nobody can answer that. And they're like, oh, it's just pure manipulation. Okay, I can kind of get that in the silver industry, but I work the lumber industry. There's not happening in the same fashion, right? That whole paper silver manipulation game that they're playing with the 150 paper ounces for every ounce that's in physical reality is not the same game that they're playing with in lumber. Right? And, people who think that they are have to understand that a contract for 110,000 board feet of lumber is an extreme amount of lumber to take delivery on. The people who are playing that game are the people who know what they're doing, right? It ain't screwing around trying to figure out how it is that they can sell 150 paper ounces of lumber or paper contracts of lumber for every physical one that's out there. That's not the same game that they're playing. So yeah, I don't know how they justify it. Because they don't know. Like, they literally don't know. Most people, here's the problem that I think most people are ended up facing when they don't realize this, is that every person who's been following the economy, following the Federal Reserve, following all the inflationary scenario and stuff, has not internalized the idea or even conceptualized the idea that the Federal Reserve was looking for inflation to be moderately above 2% for some time, with no mathematical formula for figuring it out. And because the only thing that they hear is 2% target, that's what they believe. And that right there, that little section of information has now got so many people confused about what it is that's coming from the Federal Reserve and their monetary policy that they really just don't know what the hell's going on. Like, literally, I cannot find anybody out there who is regularly discussing average inflation targeting, flexible average inflation targeting to be more specific about it. Nobody's talking about the neutral interest rate. And very rarely does anybody take into consideration the credible threat theory, where the words coming from the Federal Reserve has more power than their actions. And if you don't believe me, 2023 Federal Reserve dot plot predicting 7-8 interest rate cuts coming in 2024 had lowered the mortgage rates before the Federal Reserve took any kind of action. The moment that they took action, mortgage rates went the other way. It's all about the Fed's words. It has very little to do with their actions. 99% of the people have no clue about that. And that's the reason why they look at the Federal Reserve and say stuff like they are bumping around like Mr. Magoo, because they don't know. They made these predictions that the Federal Reserve was going to try and get inflation down to the 2% target, and they failed at that because they didn't realize that the Federal Reserve was actually going for moderately above 2% for some time. Right? They were able to achieve that, didn't let people know that that's what they were doing, allowed everybody, including the mainstream media, to believe that they were going for a 2% target, and they're not quite making it there. Oh, bummer for us, right? Federal Reserve giving high fives in the background, knowing that they were actually trying to achieve an inflation level exactly where we are today. Nobody knows this, right? I mean, nobody has internalized that into their strategies. Everybody thinks that, man, they can't quite make it. They're not quite getting there. What? Man, they're still trying. No, they're not. They're not trying to get anywhere but where they are. This is exactly where they want to be. They're not trying to get anywhere else, right? In fact, it's even better if you do believe that they are trying, because what that does is it creates an inflationary scenario that raises the neutral interest rate. The Fed has said many times they want to be at neutral. Now, people think that they are going to travel to neutral. Very few people actually understand that neutral may travel to them. Right? Since nobody has internalized this, most people get it wrong. In fact, everybody gets it wrong. And I don't mean to be like arrogant, cocky, or anything when I say this, but I'm just wishing that at some point somebody would have picked up on it too and been expressing that within their videos. But they don't, so I'm the only one. So it's very frustrating, right? To be the only one out here who feels like I'm wearing the tinfoil hat, considering that if I'm the only one saying it and 99% of the people are saying something else, who's the crazy one? Right? Must be me. Even though I got document after speech after, all the evidence. It's laid out right there in front of me, coming directly from the Federal Reserve. I'm trying to show other people and nobody's looking at it. And I'm like, you guys want to believe that mainstream media stuff? You want to believe Gunlock, who's like believing that the Federal Reserve has no idea what they're doing and they're bumping around like Mr. Magoo? Yeah, I guess I would have said that too if I made the wrong prediction. I would probably say that exact same thing, right? But since I didn't make the wrong prediction and then I'm following the Federal Reserve's actual statements, I'm not trying to make it up. I'm just like, this is what they're saying. And I don't know why everybody else doesn't clue in on it too and say, yeah, that's what they're saying. All right, what time is it? I got to get going. What time? Okay, local enterprise broadcasting. Thank you so much for the $9.99. Everyone needs to take a deep breath and see what he actually does. Right now, I would say Trump is the credible threat phase. Yeah, absolutely it is. That is absolutely correct. Right? The threat of tariffs. I mean, didn't he just threaten Russia with more sanctions and stuff like that? I'm like, you think they're scared of that? I mean, it was like, that's not a threat. They were like, yeah, aren't you already doing that to us? It was just like, yeah, okay, we're really worried about more sanctions, All right, capitalism is not perfect, but the best system we have. I agree with that, Kirk. I agree with that for sure. All right, I love Trump is pretending to fight the culture wars. Yeah. So are interest rates going up or down at the next Fed meeting? The next Fed is like a feeding. At the next Fed meeting predictions. Okay, Tom, Flo, try to understand it doesn't matter. Right? Try to understand, like, I can care less what direction the Fed goes with their interest rates. Care less. Doesn't mean nearly as much as what the communication about it is going into it. Please try to understand that. The credible threat theory is if you are to truly internalize the credible threat theory to understand the Federal Reserve, how it is that they are conducting themselves with their monetary policy, you have to understand that it's all about the words. The question that you ask is about their action. Their action has very little to do with it anymore. All right? Nobody, again, 99% of the people are focused in on the action. That's exactly what the Federal Reserve wants you to do. They want you to focus in on their action about that interest rate cut. So their communication is more powerful. If you are focused in on what they are going to do with the interest rate adjustments, their communication about it will be more impactful. Okay? So again, you have to step back and look at the communication about what it is that they are going to do and how it is that the market is interpreting that information. Are they receiving it in a positive or negative light? I mean, I've explained this stuff a lot, guys, and I know it's difficult because most of the other people that you're listening to out there don't take in this kind of consideration, and they're more focused in on the interest rate cuts or the adjustment itself. And I get it. I get why, because that's how most people would have interpreted the Federal Reserve in their strategy for decades. After the great financial crisis, it came to an end. We have to understand that adjustment through the monetary policy adjustment through the Fed funds rate is not the effective tool. It doesn't work anymore. The communication about it does. Right? That's because if you really want to understand, if you really want to know how the Federal Reserve is dealing with the economy, with the monetary policy, you have to internalize that. You have to literally force yourself to then say, okay, what happens with the rate adjustment isn't the important part. The communication about it is. Okay? And so it's not, it doesn't matter. Like my prediction about the Fed adjustment is meaningless, right? If I was right or wrong, it doesn't make any difference, right? What does make the difference is their communication and how the market interprets that information and how it is that I can now conduct myself based on that idea. Not the rate cuts, but the communication and how the market is receiving that information. So important to understand this. It is so important. And the thing about this is that nobody else is going to be able to explain this because they don't know. They literally don't know. Everything that they do will be based off of the interest rate adjustments, about the Fed funds rate adjustments. Everything will be based around that. And therefore, they will not be able to strategize and communicate through their videos, through their articles, through their blogs or whatever. They will not be able to communicate what it is that the Federal Reserve is doing because they are not focused in on the right things. They're not focused in on the communication and how the people are receiving that communication. They're listening to the words and they're trying to predict what the outcome will be. Very wrong. It's nothing could be further from finding out the truth than to follow what they are doing in that fashion, right? To say, yes, the interest rate adjustment is the outcome that I am looking for. I want to know what that is. If that's the question that you are asking, you will definitely miss it. Because by the time that happens, it will have already occurred. The time for positioning yourself would have happened weeks before. Right. All right, what time is it? All right, I'm going to give you guys another 5 minutes here. I should have already gone in, but I'm going to give it 5 more minutes here. And again, like, I'm not trying to be cocky or arrogant or anything else like that. I'm really not. I'm just like to the point now that I would just want other economists, other people out there on the mainstream to bring up these three things. Average inflation targeting, right? Flexible average inflation targeting, where the Federal Reserve is looking to have inflation moderately above 2% for some time, because that is their strategy from their own statements. Right? This 2% target is a 2% target over the long run. Right? They say that over time, 2% over time. Right? The 2% goal is not a target that they are trying to get inflation to achieve. The 2% is a long run average. Flexible average inflation targeting. If you don't believe me, just look it up. Federal Reserve flexible average inflation targeting. Very few people will be discussing it. You can find the evidence yourself. You can go back through my videos and watch them. Right? If you don't want to go looking for the articles yourself or the Fed links yourself, just go back through my videos. You'll be able to find them within there. Right? Flexible average inflation targeting is something that very few people actually discuss. Right? The other one, right? The credible threats, the words, the jawboning, the signaling, the forward guidance. That is their monetary policy tool. Right? And since nobody really understands that that's what it is that they are doing, they don't believe it, they don't understand it, and they don't think about it. The last one is the neutral interest rate. How the Federal Reserve is really trying to have an elevated inflation expectation that will raise the neutral interest rate. It does two things. One, it means that they don't have to do anything with their monetary policy. They can just sit there. Neutral will find them. And if the neutral interest rate was to rise, that gives them the ability to drop that Fed funds rate far enough below neutral to actually stimulate the economy. That is not an effective tool at this point because the neutral interest rate hasn't risen far enough. It's gone up some. They do have some power. So when it comes to monetary policy adjustment through the Fed funds rate, they do have some power there, but it's very small. They would love to have more of it back. And by having more of it back means that they need to raise that neutral interest rate, which comes from an elevated inflation expectation. Remember, the neutral interest rate is a rate that they are neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. They're neutral. Okay? With an elevated inflation expectation, that will raise the neutral interest rate. Get that neutral interest rate far above zero, which was very close to where it was. They get it far enough above zero. When they do drop the Fed funds rate back to zero, they will be far enough below neutral that it will actually stimulate the economy. Right? Very few people discuss it this way because they don't know. They don't know about the neutral interest rate. I don't know why. Right? I mean, it's not like they didn't discuss it. It's not like it's not common knowledge. Everybody, I mean, you can type in neutral interest rate. There's all kinds of information. Everybody knows it exists. Nobody knows exactly where it's at, but they know that it's out there. But yet very few people take it into consideration what that means for the strategy. All right, moving on. We got Sarah Smith with the $1.99. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the super chats. Man, they're pouring in. Tom Flo, thank you for the $5. He says thank you. I thank you back, sir. Really appreciate you guys. And thank you, Brody and All Nighter for being there, guys. You do a great job for the channel. I really appreciate you guys. Mom says, has $4.99, says, I would like to make your theory into a kid's book. Any thoughts on or objections? No, please do so. Please do so. You know, the credible threat theory is not my, like, I don't know, patented theory or something like that. I want everybody to know this. I want people to be out there understanding the credible threat theory, expanding on the credible threat theory. Like, I'm not that smart, guys. I'm really not. Like, I barely graduated high school. I stutter when I read. I have reading comprehension issues. I'm not that smart, right? There's people out there who could really internalize this information, really break it down, and really come up with some good stuff, right? I'm just literally scratching the surface. There are so many people out there who could do so much better with this information than I can. But nobody knows to look. Right? And so if you can put out a children's book that will at least spark somebody's interest to say, hey man, I need to do some of this own research myself to figure this thing out, I would love that. I would absolutely love that. So yeah, go for it. All right, where's his mic? It's in his shirt or his phone. I can't tell if the audio glitches or when he touches his jacket or when his arms go towards the phone, or if the phone moves. Is there glitches in it? I'm sorry, guys. My phone's getting really old, and no, I should order a mic. I haven't done that yet because you guys gave me a hard time and sent me money to buy a mic, so I should go get one. All right, imagine living in the Pacific Northwest saying there is a lumber shortage. Yeah, isn't that strange, right? But no, that occurs. Like, I mean, I was calling out the lumber shortage back in late 2019 into 2020. Coming directly from, you know, being in this, you know, timber industry and being in the timber land, it was pretty obvious to me what was happening. Now, for a lot of other people out there, they would call it manipulation and greed and all kinds of stuff, and they would point at like these huge stacks of lumber saying, oh, look, they got plenty of lumber. They're just not shipping it or anything. Okay, that's a great fun story to tell, but that's not very realistic to how the supply chain works, right? Like, you have to think, lumber is almost like, if you can imagine lumber going through the country like water, like flowing like water, right? It comes from the hills in a log form, it flows down through the streets to the mills, then ends up on the rails, the trucks, and now it flows, right? It's flowing into the country, and it's a continuous operation, right? Constantly flowing through. So there's always rail movement, right? At any given time, there's no stopping. It's constant, right? There's rail movement of lumber. All of a sudden, you put a stop to that, right? And that flow of lumber goes through the system. And now there's nothing flowing through the system. And now you got to fire it back up again because you got demand rising. So you start back up at the hills and you start flowing that lumber back into the system. How long does that take before you have the sluices filled? And now you have a constant, steady flow of lumber again. Right? This is what I saw. This is how I witnessed it. I'm like, hey, if you put this gap in production, you are going to have issues that come from that. It's a constant, steady flow of material. It's heavy, it's bulky. You need equipment and trains and trucks and all kinds of stuff to move this stuff around. It's not like, you know, throwing it in the back of a car. I mean, you could throw a little piece of it, but it's not like, that's not the way this industry works. It is a constant flowing, massive amounts of equipment and effort and time and energy that goes into it to keep this flow constant. Very important to understand it that way. Alrighty, guys, I have got to go. What time is it? Yeah, I got like 5 minutes left here. Super chats is to make sure I got all the super chats. I want to make sure I thank everybody. Mom, thank you so much for the $4.99. That's not my mom. That's her name, Mom. All right, Tom Flo with the $5. Thank you so much. And we got Sarah Smith with the $1.99 super sticker. We got Local Enterprise Broadcasting with the $9.99. Thank you so much for the support. And ACBNB with the $1.99. This is one that it looks like I missed. Thank you for all you do. You offer some of the best insight. Well, thank you so much for that. I appreciate the kind words. And then Luke Patterson with the $5. You guys are always so supportive of the Uneducated Economist. Thank you so much for all that support. You know, it's every day we come out here, we're breaking this stuff down so that we can make the best decisions for ourselves. And it's not always easy, because a lot of times we get very nervous about what it is that's happening and the uncertainty that has taken place. And then when you're watching the mainstream media and you're listening to all these people, and it can get very overwhelming very fast. Take a minute, internalize this information for yourself. Understand that the position that other people are taking is not the same position that you are taking. You own your own economy. There are people out there right now within this economy who are absolutely killing it, right? They don't have a problem. They figured it out. It's important for us to do the same for ourselves. Not everybody wants to have $100 million and flying all over the world and doing all kinds of stuff like that. That's great for some people. Other people just want a normal life. We just want to be able to pay our bills on time and be able to have a comfortable existence without, you know, stress or worry about what it is that's coming to the future. Again, very difficult for a lot of people to do this, but it's not as hard as you might think. Right? Once you have internalized, understand this information for yourself, you understand that there is certain things that are going to happen that is not going to be able to be easily reversed, like the inequality, the manufacturing base. Things like this are not something that is politically capable of change in a single moment. Right? It ain't going to happen in a month or a year or anything like that. It doesn't work like that. So it's best to understand why it is that it's occurring this way, that the efforts that they put in, although might seem very helpful, that there is certain economic forces that are not going to be able to be changed. Okay? Internalize that information for yourself, and I assure you, you will be just naturally making the right decisions. You will find your savings increasing. You'll find your investments, you know, doing better. You will find your business, you know, performing better as well. And it's just a matter of figuring this stuff out for yourself, internalizing that information, not live in fear. It's okay to be scared, right? I mean, fear is a natural emotion that's going to be there. But to live in fear constantly means that you are going to have a negative energy attached to you, and it'll be very difficult to find, you know, the awesomeness in life that you're looking for. All right, one more super chat, and then I'm going to call it quits. All right. What is that? Femi Kami Tata? Femi Koma Tata? I'm not sure how to say the name there. Thank you so much for the $3.99 Canadian. I really appreciate the support. You guys are so awesome for being here. Uneducated. Whoops. Don't fall over, guys. All right, keep you guys up there. All right. I'm going to get back there. Live super chats. Okay. Okay, you guys are awesome. Thank you very much for being here. It was a fun live stream. Kind of stuttered through a lot of it, but I think there was some really good information in there, especially talking about the Canadian lumber and how that's going to impact, you know, the prices of lumber futures going, you know, into the coming administration's deregulations or whatever, tariffs or something that's going to be happening. Very concerning, but again, I think that after you kind of like, you know, step back and look at it for a little bit, it's a little bit more calming than what other people are trying to, you know, not necessarily calming, but less anxiety ridden. All right, Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.